Peace. This is King Noble, Black Supremacy. And with this particular video, I want to talk about how the Nipsey Hussle story is not an African-American story. It's not an African-American success story. That's not to take away from the benefit that his story is for the African-American community, or the benefits of his achievements, the progressive impact that they had on the black community. I don't want to take away from that. I just want to talk about how it wasn't an African-American success story particularly. It isn't a Pan-African success story. It is an African success story for all Africans around the world. It is a testament of African unity. So taking it out of the African-American narrative says some positive things about it, but it also says some unique things about it. Africans can come over here and become militant and become conscious, become a part of the black community, support the black community, become revolutionaries, and they can have the interests of blacks as their number one priority, and they can stand with African Americans against United States imperialism and global white supremacy. That Nipsey Hussle is a testament of that, unarguably. And we need more Africans to come over here to America and to do the same thing that Nipsey Hussle did. Now, Nipsey Hussle was a store owner, a corner store owner. There are a lot of immigrant corner store owners. This is not new. Immigrants come into our communities and they open up stores and businesses and they buy property and real estate. This is not new. The only difference between Nipsey Hussle and other immigrants who've come over to this country is that he had a black agenda, he had a black swag, and he was heavily influenced, shaped, and cultivated by black culture. But he was an immigrant nonetheless, and there are plenty of Nipsey Hussles. When we talk about buy black and buying back the block, the Arabs and immigrants, Ethiopians, Eritreans, Somalians, etc., have come into our community and bought property and open up stores. For Nipsey Hussle, it was not buying back the block, but it was utilizing the block for the purpose and benefit of the community to the best of his capacity. But the immigrants have always owned commercial property in our communities and in our neighborhoods. What made Nipsey Hussle unique is that he had a love for black American or African American culture, and he identified himself with African Americans. Let's keep that in mind. When you adopt him and say that he represents us buying back our blocks, that is not necessarily true. If an African comes over here and opens up a business in our community, it would not be considered us buying back our blocks, buying back our communities. Because in that case, we do own a community. Every time you see an Arab, a dark Arab, or African brother, a Moroccan, open up a business in our community, a corner store, any type of business, then we should say, well, we're buying back our block, but we don't. But all of a sudden with Nipsey Hussle, we adopt him as being us buying back our block. That is not necessarily the true narrative for several reasons. Because for one, immigrants it's easier for them to open up businesses in our community. They have more support from the government, they have more support from the community, and they have more support from their people to exchange and sell the real estate to them and let them into the retail business world. That's a certain privilege that they have that African Americans do not have. Their own people look out for them. Their people have a monopoly on retail, corner stores, wholesale. They have a monopoly on it. So if you are an immigrant, then there's open doors for you. So Nipsey Hussle wasn't an African American who bought back the block and went into retail business. He was an immigrant that was supported by the immigrant community to inherit and run businesses in the community as they have always done. Let's not get this twisted. We adopted him. We added that narrative to make us feel good. But the truth is, if we went to open up stores in our community in the way that Nipsey Hussle did, that we would run into many challenges. We would not get the same support from the immigrant community. We would not be looked at as immigrants. We would not have the exact same racism and discrimination. We would be discriminated upon. We would not have the same green light that Nipsey Hussle had. These are the facts. So while he used his immigrant privilege, he used being an immigrant in the likeness of Selassie, looking somewhat like his imperial majesty, coming from a place not too far from Ethiopia, somewhere in the same landmass in that same area. The world, much of the community responded to him as an immigrant because of his appearance, not as an African American shop owner or business owner. These are just the facts. When you look at the documentary of Nipsey Hussle on World Star Hip Hop, and you see him and his brothers in the business and his father, which is 100% immigrant, 100% Eritrean, not so much culturally transformed by Black American culture, and you see his brother, it looks like regular immigrant shop owners that we see in all of our community. The only difference was Nipsey's love for Black culture and hip-hop and rap, and his identification with Black people. Otherwise, you take all that away from him, he's just an immigrant in a corner store. That's all. A regular immigrant. And if we can adopt Nipsey Hussle as us buying back our blocks and being one of our own, then we can adopt every immigrant in our community and acknowledge every single one of them as our own. Every time we see a Eritrean, a Somalian, or African business owner, we should look at them as, hey, we're buying back our block. They are us and we are them. But something happened different with Nipsey. We just did not see him in that manner. If Nipsey was not coming from a place that was very African, if he didn't pass somewhat of an African American, which is arguable too, he would be looked at as a culture vulture. That's what he would honestly be looked at, as a culture vulture. The same way we look at DJ Khaled, the same way we look at some of the other immigrants that have come into hip-hop, come into rap. These are just the facts. But we take him and we look at him as an African-American success story. Yes, it is a success story of a human being, of an African who had love for Black and African Americans and identified with them strongly and was very vigilant and proactive in humanitarian service, who even tried to awaken African Americans and raise their consciousness. But if we don't understand our plight is different than Nipsey Hussle's in this country, then we are not awakened to the political struggle that we face as Black people within our own community, which has been a struggle with immigrants, the immigrant communities, has been a struggle with the institutions, and has been a struggle with white supremacy. the African Americans are the most hated tribe of African people in the world, if not the most hated people in the world. This is a fact. The African American is the largest prison populated tribe in the world. We are almost down to a slave colony, and we are looked down upon all races, all tribes, and all communities, which makes it harder, even in this country that is a melting pot, to rise to the level of success and independence that we see Nipsey Hussle rise to. We have to kick through more doors, deal with more challenges. His immigrants accepted with him in open arms, showed him the ropes, and our community gave him the respect in opening up a corner store that we have given every immigrant person since the beginning of our journey here in this country. Our grandparents respected them, our parents, and even us. We allowed them to open up these businesses in our community, and we support their businesses. And if it was a black person that did it, they would not get the same respect from black people, from immigrants, from whites, or from the institutions. I got to keep it real. Nipsey Hussle was an immigrant success story, but a reoccurring one, because a lot of immigrants come over here and are very successful in their business endeavors. It's nothing new. It's nothing new. Nothing new. Nipsey Hussle didn't buy back the block. He inherited the immigrant privilege to peacefully possess the real estate in the community. Keep it real. Keep it real. Different status, different challenges, different oppositions. So if we go to a black person and say, you should, an African American, and I don't say African American to be racist or to distinguish us, because I'm a Pan-Africanist. But I understand the politics of our unique situation as African Americans. And I understand the hatred that we are up against that other races are not confronted with. And we can't be blind to that. This has to be dealt with. So we're overlaying the narrative of our desire for success and independence and to control our blocks and to open up businesses in our community with Nipsey Hussle. Yeah, he was for black people. Yeah, he employed black. Yeah, he supported the community. But at the same time, his struggle was slightly different from ours. And how he is looked at by some blacks, they looked at him the same way they looked at as any Arabs, any immigrants that come into our community and open up businesses. They looked at them with the same amount of disdain, disregard, and ignorance. Just because we're conscious, just because we're Pan-Africanists, just because we embraced him, doesn't mean that every black person felt the same way about Nipsey Hussle that we did. Some people may have saw him as an invader in our community. Look how they rob these gas stations and rob these corner stores and rob these liquor stores. What makes Nipsey Hussle different from any other establishment or business that have become under attack by blacks because they have set up in our community and we deal with them as invaders because they are not a part of we don't see them as a part of our community. They come in our community, open up their businesses, and they regulate, and they call the shots, and they tell us when not to come into the store and worry about us stealing, and they control shit in our communities. I'm not making this up. I'm not saying that Nipsey Hussle was that type of dude, but you have to understand that this exists as well, that this exists. So what makes Nipsey Hussle exempt, other than the fact that we understand that he had his mind in the right place and that he may have been more Pan-Africanist. Does that make us blind to all of the disrespect and disregards the immigrant community have had for us in opening up establishments within our communities? How we have been exploited by these immigrant communities, and how that narrative has been educated and taught to our children and passed on. That fuck these immigrants attitude, fuck these niggas coming in our community opening up shit thinking they calling shots. Fuck these niggas being able to shine and open up shit in our community and we not even able to open up shit in our own community. Does that narrative not exist? And does Nipsey Hussle escape that narrative and is automatically adopted into the black economic community? He's a representative of human success, human achievement, human business savvy and brilliance, and having a hustler mind, being tenacious and aggressive about his desires and what he wants to achieve. He bears witness to human greatness, to human potential, but not necessarily African American success or the African American journey to independence, freedom, and liberation. He doesn't represent that because it was easier for him. And he fit into the mold, even though he bent it a little bit with his love for black culture, of his amalgamation into black culture. He bent the mold a little bit, but the mold was there for him to be an entrepreneur, to be independent, and have the support of his own community and the support of the community. Because of his immigrant status. He was like the black African American, but there still was something else about him. And the immigrant community that control wholesale and retail and real estate knew that. And that helped him go a lot further than any black person that just decided they want to buy back the block. It helped him get a lot further, even though he used it for good purposes. It's a fact. And then he's in Los Angeles, which is a melting pot. There's all type of nationalities in Los Angeles. So they're not so segregated. So you can kind of fit into other people's cultural dynamic easier. You're not just dealt with based upon your race in Los Angeles and your ethnicity. But that doesn't mean everyone in Los Angeles thinks that way or feel that way. That it's not some people out there that say, well, hold up, man, these immigrants is running shit in our business on the block. They in our neighborhoods, in our communities, opening up shit and running shit. We can't even open up businesses in our own neighborhood. Was it jealousy? Or was it frustration with the African American plight and situation in this country? I just want to touch on that narrative and present that, because that's important. That does not justify him being slain. It does not justify that at all. It is not an attempt to excuse that. But it's to give deeper understanding and to make sure we're not overlooking the political plight and the dilemma that we face as a people. Because we're conscious does not remove. Because we're Pan-African and because we can adopt people into our